This is but one video in a series of videos, the purpose of which are to provide RCAF Association members and leaders with a better understanding of what makes the RCAF Association work. In our last video, we introduced the idea behind governance and orientation training. We also mentioned the three kinds of leadership non-profit volunteer type organizations like ours thrive on. Specifically, we need transformational leaders, situational leaders, and servant leaders. We specifically do not need any transactional leaders, which is what our current problem is. Transactional leaders focus only on each moment as it comes, while transformational leaders inspire us to think about tomorrow, next week, next month, and next year. Servant leaders are those who only have the members in mind and the well-being of all Canadians when it comes to matters of Canada's Air Force. Finally, situational leaders are by far the best, since they are either born or are groomed to adapt to each and every situation and respond accordingly. We also talked about an earlier version of our vision: to keep Canadians flying, or in the French translation, to keep Canadians interested in flying. A vision statement is deliberately formed in such a way that it can never be achieved. If you can achieve what your vision says, then it's actually better suited as a mission statement. That vision statement is now more than 10 years old, and just as organizations tend to do, our vision has evolved too. Today, our vision is celebrating Canadian Air Force experiences, shaping Canada's aerospace tomorrows. This vision statement is perfectly presented in a brochure we have shared throughout the RCAF Association. On the very same page are elements of our mission, a mission statement that truly reflects what is presented on this large poster behind me. The poster represents the strategic view of the RCAF Association, the 50,000-foot view, if you like. Let's spend a few minutes describing what the poster shows us. In the center, surrounding the roundel, are 6 images depicting our manifest function and 5 latent functions. The manifest function of an organization is the one for which the organization was created. Let's talk about our manifest function, advocacy, before we move on to describe our latent functions. It's important that I say something first, before dwelling on advocacy. Organizations that have persisted for so long can find themselves struggling to manage what at times might seem like unmanageable dissonance. Struggles and challenges arise because as organizations grow and evolve, they seem to move away from their founding purpose toward directions that are increasingly difficult to connect to the organization created so many decades ago. In more technical terms, a strategic viewpoint becomes increasingly difficult to acquire, and people will default to that which they know, rather than learn about that which they may not yet understand. Each of us gravitates toward the familiar, never gaining any insights about the evolving system our organization has become. Dissonance grows, and we all become reductionists, expert on and with our own perceptions of what the organization should be doing and how. We account for this reductionism, giving credit to all for their determination by portraying every relevant component of what we do on this large poster. Yes, this process does step us back, and it looks further afield from a greater height to see the entire association and what it has become. It will be perfectly fine once everyone gives due consideration to all of the moving pieces, for each of us to continue holding on to the piece or pieces we are most passionate about. What will be even better is if, while doing so, we acknowledge a newfound respect and admiration for others who may not share our own views, but who believe in their own hearts what they do believe in is in fact contributing to the RCAF Association's success. Yes, each part we hold close to our hearts can be considered our own agenda, but it is the collection of pieces, the sum of our hearts, and our collaborative agendas that will win the day. So step back, take a more strategic view, and you will see the wonders within and beyond our association for what they are, the components of a long-standing effort to make our Air Force stronger with each passing day. The RCAF Association, as we mentioned in our last video, is a single or common interest, individual member funded, non-profit aerospace industry supporting, community service oriented organization of air-minded citizens familiar with and supportive of the traditions of the RCAF. The association was conceived in 1944 during the Second World War and formally established in May 1948 by a Government of Canada order in council. Formal incorporation followed in 1951. Unlike the Royal Canadian Legion, the creation of the RCAF Association was not the result of a special act of Parliament or law. Consequently, any attempt to compare the two organizations must acknowledge this important difference. What may be good for the Royal Canadian Legion is not necessarily so for the RCAF Association, and vice versa. Most importantly, efforts to compare Legion branches to RCAF Association wings is simply not appropriate in almost every respect. What do? Notwithstanding the variety of functions, activities, and mission elements portrayed, the common or single interest underpinning everything we do is advocacy in support of our country's air power, with penultimate focus on Canada's Air Force and the men and women therein. All other activities and functions performed by our members, including members who may have also chosen to affiliate with one of the various wings, traces back to this single or common interest in advocacy. Any function or activity that does not or cannot be explained in terms of advocacy only serves other entities, communities, and individuals with no real vested interest at all in the well-being of the RCAF Association itself. Certain regulatory exigencies, the non-distribution constraint, for example, are specifically imposed on non-profit associations to help them implement checks and balances to prevent, among other things, mission creep, especially mission creep into functions like entrepreneurial activities, provincial incorporation of small businesses, also and mistakenly called wings, that happen to be outside the bounds of the RCAF Association Constitution and bylaws, precisely because of the non-distribution constraint. This will be an important subject matter to return to. Suffice to say, incorporated wings were never intended to be business enterprises separate from the RCAF Association itself. For as long as we believe this, we will continue to decline in the face of growing dissonance. More on this later. So what do we mean by advocacy? The advocacy function can be daunting for some, but any fear of advocacy stems largely from a misunderstanding of the activity largely caused by the example set by our good neighbors in the United States. Their form of government, which is a republic, and more emphasis on the rights of the individual in comparison to Canada, mean in the United States it is all right to undertake highly politicized actions under the guise of advocacy, to include lobbying and financial campaigning. Canada's form of government, parliamentary, and other important differences that tend to align us more with our British and European roots, mean our advocacy efforts must be much less politicized. Understandably, our members have a more difficult time determining what may or may not be permitted in terms of advocacy, in part because television and social media tend to confuse us. Advocacy means activities and undertakings that help build social capital, connections, in our communities, encourage civic engagement or democracy in action, lend limited support through measured political participation like volunteerism and good governance, and advocate for specific causes. While it may seem difficult to draw a political line somewhere among these activities, over which the association should not cross, such a line is more easily seen in terms of discouraging other advocacy efforts such as lobbying for specific legislation and financing campaigns. Viewed as a continuum, These 6 areas of advocacy paint a picture of lesser partisanship to the left of the spectrum, with building social capital on the one end of the spectrum, and increasing partisanship to the right, with financing campaigns at the other end of the spectrum. Advocacy work is viewed as the wholesale part of what nonprofits can do, while service work is recognized as the retail part. Knowing what motivates your members, either advocacy or service, helps us to understand where and on what actions some might prefer to lend themselves as volunteers. Nevertheless, as long as our service-oriented members understand that our founding and primary function is advocacy, we can expect our RCAF Association to thrive. If, however, members grow roots in either the advocacy camp or the service camp, and then mistakenly project their camp as being more important or even more true to our central mission than the other, we can expect dissonance that, left unchecked, can destroy the RCAF Association. In the non-profit volunteer sphere, no single member owns the association. In reality, all members share in the success and failure of the association equally.